Welcome to another 4-H Minecraft Basics video. In this video we're going to cover the liquids that exist in the game. There are two basic liquids that you'll come across in the world, those being water and lava, and several other liquids that you'll find that you cannot place in the world but do exist, for example milk and potions. So when you come across water in the world, basically you'll come across two different types of water. The first being what's called a source block, which you can see here at the beginning, and then flow blocks, which are water of or basically a liquid of the same type that will flow from the source block. So in this case, we see an example of a water source block, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 flow blocks that flow out from the source of the water. So if I interrupt the flow, you'll see that the water flow has stopped, but once I break that, the source block will push water back into the flow all the way out to the maximum distance. Lava is very similar, but lava is a lot thicker, so once lava is placed, you'll see it's flowing very, very slowly, and lava also only flows 3 blocks out, 1, 2, 3 from the source block. So now the flow out from the source block applies in all directions. So you'll see here as we look from the top down, the single source block in the center there is pushing water into a flow in 7 blocks in all directions, creating a fairly large flow of water. In the case of lava, you can see that the same thing applies. It will flow out 3 blocks from the source block. So the distance that water will flow, or lava will flow, is always out to its maximum of 7, unless it drops. So here we'll see an example of a single source block that flows for 2 blocks, or 3 blocks technically, and then runs into a drop, at which point it will flow another 7 blocks, and we've hit another drop, and then will flow another 4 or 5, really out to its distance again. So every time water or lava drops, the distance that it can flow extends out another 7 blocks in the case of water, or 3 blocks in the case of lava. And again, if we interrupt it, you'll see that it blocks the flow beneath where we've interrupted the flow, and then if we break that, the flow resumes. When you're working with water in the world, you're not going to be able to get rid of all of the water just by blocking the flow. The way that you'll need to do that is to actually interrupt the source, and so you can either place a block in front of the source or crush the source by actually placing a block on top of the source. So you'll notice now when we break the block that was placed over the source block, the water will not return, and the flow is completely interrupted until a new source block is placed. That means that as you're working and running around in the world, you'll come across lava and water. Normally water is definitely very visible on the surface, but sometimes as you're working in caves you'll come across water flows in caves. And sometimes on the surface you'll come across lava, but you'll definitely come across lava as you dig down very deep into the earth. So as you come across those, you can interrupt the flow of water by placing a block in front of it. However, if you break that block, the water flow will resume. Or again, you can crush the water by actually filling the block where that source was, and then the water will not come back. So if you can crush water, which makes it permanently disappear, how would you create new source blocks, since that's where the water all comes from? One thing to note is that even though you can create cool waterfalls, and it looks like the water should fill up this area down here and create a pond or a lake, the reality is that all of the blocks, other than the very first block that was placed, are really just source blocks. So that's how it's different than we would have in the real world, where water would flow from where it started and then fill where it's going to. In Minecraft, all of these blocks are just flow blocks. So you can create new source blocks, and there's some interesting properties for source blocks. And this right here is a configuration that you would use to create an infinite water source. And the way that you do that is by placing a source block in one corner, and then you place another source block in the opposite corner. And you'll notice that the water became very still, because as water flow comes between 2 source blocks, that water flow will turn into a source block itself. So here's a good example where we've got 3 in a row, and I can place a source block at one end, which creates 2 flow blocks, and I place another source block at the opposite end, and you'll see that that central flow block ended up becoming a source block. So as long as a flow block is between 2 source blocks, it will become a source block itself. The reason that that works in this square is because the flow blocks which were in these 2 corners ended up coming into contact with the 2 source blocks in the opposite corners. So if you recall, I placed a source block there and there, but these 2 blocks are definitely now source blocks with lily pads on them. And if I break these blocks that I just placed, you'll see the flow blocks start and then they turn almost immediately back into a. So the important thing to note in this scenario is that only the central block will ever regenerate as a source block. So if I crush the source block on the end and then let it flow again, you'll see that this flow block, so this block at the end is the one that's a flow block, doesn't have anything that it can run into on the end here to become another source block. So these 2 blocks right here are the source blocks, and this one could never become one. So when we're working with lava, that does not apply. So lava is a little different than water in that if I place 2 source blocks like this, these flow blocks will never become another source block. So lava is definitely a limited resource in the normal world. Although it's not that limited because there is quite a lot of it. So if I place 2 blocks there, you'll see that those blocks disappeared and the source blocks do not regenerate.